In a globalized and deeply connected world where mainstream media cannot continue to mask the interconnected and deep-rooted grievances of the subjugated and demeaned peoples, these citizen rebellions can pave the way for a, quote, global intifada. This is the words of Rami Kaudry, Director of Global Engagement at the American University of Beirut. In our last segment, we looked at the word intifada and what it means, literally and practically. The history shows that a call for an intifada is a call for violence and unrest in the street against civilians. I don't think that there are any questions as to what the term is calling for. This is why it is so frightening when, in 2020, the social media world began to see the phrase "Globalize the Intifada" pop up all over the internet. This idea was to bring back the first and second intifada, which saw the violence and death of Israeli and Arab citizens to a global scale. They called for the same type of attacks that were seen in the intifadas before, but now have it outside Israeli borders. After many years of Israeli defensive measures to protect Israelis from the harm of suicide bombings on buses and pizza shops, Palestinian terrorists within Gaza and the Palestinian territories have found a harder time attempting to harm Israelis. The idea of globalizing the Intifada was the next step to try and harm not only Israelis in the land of Israel, but now targeting all Jews all over the world. This, of course, ignores the reality that not all Jews of the diaspora even support or have any connection to the state of Israel. This is simply ignored. So why do all Jews around the world deserve to be attacked, accosted, or harmed in any way for the simple fact that they're Jewish? We saw this plan come into full effect in 2021 when a conflict was sparked between Hamas in Gaza and the Israeli government. This is the first time we saw the global intifada take hold in the United States. We saw a disgusting video from the streets of New York where a Jewish man wearing a kippah or religious head covering was being beaten, kicked, and sprayed with pepper spray on the streets of New York by people holding pro-Palestinian flags and signs simply for the fact that he was Jewish. In another example in Los Angeles around the same time, a witness told local television stations that members of a caravan of cars who had approached the LA restaurant began throwing bottles at diners on a patio using anti-Semitic slurs. Quote, "It was a hate crime," the witness said. "It was prepared and they came to fight with Jewish people." Another witness said that dozens of men ran out from the caravan towards the restaurant asking, quote, "Who is Jewish?" A man identifying himself proudly as a Jew was assaulted and beaten by pro-Palestinian people for simply being Jewish. Obviously, we have to note here that the men were assaulted for being Jewish. No one asked if they were pro-Israel or Israeli or had any connection to the state of Israel whatsoever. They were simply being beaten as a Jewish person in the streets of the United States. We are seeing a rising anti-Semitism under the guise of being, quote, pro-Palestinian or, quote, anti-Israel. However, this is clearly nothing to do with the state of Israel. We have seen for years the attempt to suggest that being anti-Israel is not necessarily being anti-Semitic. In one of our earlier podcasts called "Is Being Anti-Israel Anti-Semitic?", I have suggested that this isn't always the case. However, in the case of globalizing the Intifada, we are seeing the real face of anti-Israel and their movement. People using the conflict in the Middle East as an excuse and justification for their anti-Semitic attacks against Jews all over the world. When we come back, we will look into the issue of why the media doesn't want to talk about the Globalized Intifada movement or the anti-Semitic nature of the actions. When we come back after this break on the Jewish Diaspora Report.